Well, good morning from Australia, and welcome to the rather strangely entitled presentation, Epiphanies Breathe Life into Coaching. I'm sure some of you have already Googled Epiphany, finding all sorts of connections with the three wise men. Well, all I can say is we're taking a different path here, and there'll be no star to guide you. So maybe the first thing to do is to look at a definition that I like. And here it is: an illuminating discovery which changes the next part of the story. There's one part of that caught my eye. That's the bit that where it doesn't claim to change the whole story for you, just the next part. And the cartoon is actually fairly informative too here, with its jokes about different ways to experience an epiphany. I'm just hoping that blinding flash isn't as a direct result of the one in the bottom left, a 2x4 to the head. I think I'd prefer a more benign way of getting hit by an illuminating discovery. Right then, what's the goal? Well, first of all, this presentation might fall short of 40 minutes or 30 minutes, but I can't see many complaining about that. Look, I'm not pushing you down a particular path, and I'm certainly not advocating that you ditch all your old habits in favour of new. The key phrase here is different to the one you're content with. It's so easy to get comfortable with the way we do things, and harder to accept change in that state. I'm urging you to be open to change, which could even be unwelcome at first glance, but it could be the one that you actually need. Well, I can't talk about epiphanies without referring to sources. From where did these come? And rather than set out a chronology, I'd prefer to put them into categories. From GAA people down to perceived gaps, I'll outline how the light bulb moments came about and how I used them. And after each, I'll fit in a slide to summarise what I learned. That'll be the format from here on. First one then, GAA people. Every coach can point to people within our codes who have influenced them, and I'm no different. You've probably counted 12 names there by now, and you're wondering if I'm going to trawl through them telling a story about each. Well, don't panic, that's not part of the plan. These are coaches who shaped what I did in my early school life, my club, later school career, and via tutor work and books. Some of them brought great organisation. Some had game insight, others empathy, and of course, the gift of humour. There are a few who can bring crack to under 16 training and senior training as well, but there are a couple on that list who do. I've highlighted Terence and John because it was from them that I learnt most about coaching coaches. Terence and I travelled to both Dublin and Limerick for tutor training in the 90s. I spent much of every journey asking him questions. He's a fount of knowledge. When I didn't understand and his explanation went over my head, I didn't let it go. Poor Terence had to water it down for me. And John, of course, the lateral thinker, inventor, eccentric, but extremely insightful. If you're lucky enough to meet someone of a similar ilk, find out as much as you can from that person. So here's the first lesson, with a little bit of a barred finish to it. Just as I mentioned earlier about changing when you're comfortable, you should also be open to learning from people who may disagree with what you believe. They're the ones that could end up teaching you more. Never dismiss them. So the second category and the epiphany source is other people. Now these could be others who are involved in different sports like rugby or soccer or basketball, golf, whatever. But I'm looking beyond the world of sport. I'm going to focus on people who influenced my career in teaching. And I'll make the link between what I learned in the classroom and then took to the pitch. Well, on this slide, you have the name, the action, and a photo to support the action. All you need now is the backstory. Eric Mazur is Professor of Applied Physics at Harvard University. And a number of years ago, he turned teaching on its head in that most austere of institutions. Now, he'd be the first to admit that serendipity played its part because the change did come about by chance. So it was a bit of an epiphany for Eric too. In a nutshell, Eric Mazur turned lecture theatres from places of passive note-taking, listening, or even sleeping into centres of interaction with whatever was being taught. Student learning improved, and once he had convinced his colleagues of the effectiveness of this new approach, he set about spreading the gospel of peer instruction among other universities and schools. On the basis of what I learned from him, I began to explore the whole concept of peer instruction in the classroom in school. So here's one example of peer instruction from a classroom. Something that looks positive on paper but actually shouldn't work, and it's the use of confidence scores. But it's all about creating the right environment to let people feel safe and willing to be taught by peers. Let's say we're working on a topic. I stop the class, ask for a show of hands on how well people are getting on. If you're a 3, you feel you're flying. 2 means I'm okay with most of it. 1, I could be struggling here. And a 0, I might as well be on the moon. Now at that point, I could start recapping instructions, but that doesn't happen. Instead, they get 2 or 3 minutes to mix. 0s and 1s have to find 2s and 3s, and they simply help each other. First thoughts are that it's just a copying scenario, but it doesn't turn out that way. Retention and understanding are both better all round. Peer instruction could be down to a different voice. For example, they're using the language of beginning learners to each other, but one thing is for certain, it has a place. Just like it can have a place on the pitch in the form of peer coaching. And the players in these 2 photos are working with each other to improve technique. On the left, the focus is on evasion. One player is acting as the potential tackler, and the other one's working on a feint and a sidestep. The pair are both teacher and learner rather than just 2 participants. Now, they haven't been thrown in at the deep end by the coach. They've each been given things to look for, to try and encourage. Then the coach has stepped back to give them room. The photo on the right shows peer coaching operating in a blocking exercise. Again, they have been briefed and they get to it with the minimum of coach intervention. Yep, there's a risk in what's being taught and learned in each case, but it's worth experimenting. My first attempts at promoting peer coaching were all about improving technique, and that's what I limited to for quite a while. Yet the natural follow-on from this is to use it in games and for things other than technical skills. Sometimes we measure the success of a session by its slickness or the amount of player activity. Having players step out almost seems counterintuitive. They're doing nothing and they need to be doing something. Not the case. Giving players a focus and asking them to observe a teammate in a practice game can be as valuable a learning exercise as participation. Imagine the 2 players labelled A have been asked to focus on timing of support runs. One is trying to get them right, and he has almost got a personal coach on the sideline assessing his attempts and learning at the same time. We can claim to have more experience and more expertise, but if we want player autonomy and relatedness, we need to give way. They need a chance. And here's my lesson learned. You absolutely have to try these things. Now, you may be the only one doing so, and others may dismiss them as gimmicks, but you must push the boundaries. Where else do new ideas come from? They don't have to come from committees or working groups or national level authorities. One might even start with a Harvard professor who'll never know that his peer instruction has evolved into peer coaching. And when you learn that it's practiced by the top team in the country, that's a bonus. Dublin players are doing this too. Number 3 on my Ephiphanies list, situations. And these are situations that I had to experience in order to steer me in a better direction. And when you read Master the Art of Observing, you might be thinking, but he's after covering that aspect in the previous couple of slides. Well, yes and no. The focus is still observation, but it's from a coach's perspective this time. And as I found out, there's observation and then there's observation. Simply following the play with your eye doesn't count. Well, this one, as you can see, has a fair amount of information on it. Apologies for it all being the written word, but it was the only way to draw proper comparisons. So, the 3 headings represent types of coaching that I was responsible for at different times in my coaching career. And they do run chronologically, from left to right on the screen, as my slow burner epiphany evolved. About 30 years ago, or maybe more than that, I ran a series of coaching sessions at a local club. The under-12 squad acted out drill after drill and a few games as well. And watching all of this from the sideline were at least 20 coaches. They turned up, watched me set up, listened to explanations of drills, saw their future senior players have a great time taking part, and finished the whole thing with a round of applause. Anyway, about a couple of months later, I met one of the coaches in the town and asked him how things were going at the club. No change, Philip. You did everything. We watched. Basically, he was telling me that wasn't learning, that wasn't coach education. Now, luckily for me, that seminal moment was timed to match the advent of a new coach education programme being developed at Croke Park, and I got involved with Ulster GAA and learned a different way. Participation, involvement, feedback, debriefing, etc. became the way to go, and it was excellent. The stand and watch format was consigned to the bin as far as I was concerned. However, over time, I found that lots of club coaches were devoting all their energies to setting up and running activities at the expense of checking to see what was actually going on the pitch. I was peddling hectic participation, and that wasn't real coaching either. My response to both was to look for a happy medium and to run workshops where I and the coaches prepped a games-based session. We set up together, I took charge of refereeing, and most importantly, coaches got to observe with direction. Part of our prep was to discuss what they should encourage, what they should watch for, take note of, and who they might work with. We ran the games, coaches observed, and every 5, 7, 10 minutes we would break and allow players and coaches to discuss based on those ideas. So, after that marathon, the lesson was, when it's clear there's a problem or a deficiency, get the message and go seek a better method. Illuminating discovery number 4, technology. Well, if you were overwhelmed by words in the previous section, fear not. This is all about moving and static images. And my message here is, you have to embrace this stuff. There's so much learning in it, and I've only scratched the surface. It's so easy to devolve this particular strand of coaching to the sports scientists and the professional analysts, but they work on a different level than I do. They're stratospheric compared to what I'm at. It's like they occupy the penthouse of the building and I'm on the first floor. But there was a gap on that first floor and I'm trying to fill that gap. How? First and foremost, by taking a look at techniques and habits that may hold players back. By a process of trial and error, I suppose I've learned to spot problems and then offer possible solutions for players to trial themselves. Slow motion footage has been a godsend in this respect. A professional could probably drive a coach on horses through my findings, but much of it seems to have worked so far. Take a look at the pics. It's a fact that Podrick's shots were dropping short because his upper body was twisted away from the goals as he kicked. all changed when he changed. Owen's tackling stance was too wide. The first step in Dan's evasion was too short to take him clear. And Owen's turn wasn't sharp enough to take him around a tight marker. All of my learning in that respect came from slow motion footage. Again, I have to emphasise that I had no background in analysis, and the trial and error became my teacher. Well, let me illustrate this here. 3 years ago, Kerr, as an under 12, was hitting shots from 15 or 20 metres, and they were mostly dropping short. And we could have left him, but we wanted to look at things, and he did too. So, planting his left foot or his chest on the target, hard foot, follow through, backlift, you name it, we tried it. It was only when we looked at slow motion footage that we noted that he actually sat down as he shot, and that was never going to work. The solution was simply to have him practice standing tall. Well, my point here is that I had never seen someone with that particular drawback, but from that moment on, I could add it to the list of things to look for. That was my teacher. Well, once I was on that hobby horse of technology, there was no way I was stepping off. It seemed natural to use it to look for game habits as well that were either helpful or unhelpful. And that's where I went next, looking for those habits, and technology served them up, allowing me to use them for learning. On the screen are two examples. Top left and bottom left are matched, as are top right and bottom right. So the screenshots on the left highlight the tendency that some players have to bunch in attack, to get drawn in to help the player in possession, completely unaware that 5 or 6 other teammates have the same idea. Well, what better way to convince players that they're in the habit of doing so, and then to show them how the other teams, usually the top ones, do not suffer from this malaise. The photos on the right are highlighting differences in work rate and support running, with the black circle denoting the ball carrier, yellow the players running in support, and red the casual observers who think the job is done. These are all habits that need changed, and where simple use of technology can help as a first step. More learning then. Explore this medium and use it to advance your coaching. And you don't need to be working in the professional world of analysis to do so. Number 5, and the last in the line of Ephiphanies, the perceived gap of PDC. I suppose it was my increasing use of technology that led me to wonder, who is working with individual players? Everything seemed to be directed at the team or squad. It came down to the most basic of things, and I've identified 3 players from the squad of silhouettes to highlight this. The first player on the left. If he had problems with his shooting, who was helping him? Yes, I'll acknowledge that more practice could bring about an improvement, but what if he was practicing the wrong things? The middle arrow could be pointing at a player who's a poor tackler. Does he learn with more exposure to tackling situations, more drills, or is there something else that needs looked at first? And the third arrow, this player has problems with his positioning in attack and the angles of runs that he makes. Who's working with him on those specifics? In most cases, I found that nobody was. Now, you can dismiss the need for it in one sentence by saying it wasn't necessary before, so why would it be now? Or you could look at how basketball focuses on improving the individual and learn from it. I chose the latter, and that's why I started PDC, to urge coaches to pay much more attention to individual needs and not just collective ones. I've even taken to pushing it on social media and in books, all in a drive to get more coaches on board and push player development for the individual. Last lesson of the 5. Well, if the big drive nowadays is to promote a player-centred approach, then we have to make sure that both our coach education and our coaching include a focus on developing the individual. Well, I certainly hope there are a few more epiphanies around the corner for me. But as I wait, in the meantime, I'm learning how self-determination theory can underpin good coaching. I'm trying to develop a coaching model to cover different methods. You can see there, CAD coaching. And I'm adopting a trial and error approach to finding out if the model fits what we do in the pitch. Who knows? Well, that's everything from me. And to finish here, there's no explanation needed. You can have a read through. And then all that's left is for me to say thanks for watching.
Philip, thanks very much for that session. A really, really interesting approach to coaching. But one of the things I wanted to just chat to you about was you're really calling on coaches to change their approach to what they do, even if they are getting their results.
Well, it depends what they view as results. You want to win an under-12 league, if you want an under-16 championship, absolutely. You still aim for those, you want that goal, as long as every player is being developed and every player is getting decent game time. I mean, that's what I'm calling for in that respect. Allowances have to be made for people at different stages of their development. For example, I just read something there from Sports Science that came through to do with, it was Manchester United, and they were flagging it up for their development squads, and that was that they hadn't been paying enough attention to growth spurts and what they call this idea of awkward adolescence. And we have players the same way in the GAA. They were ditching their players really quickly. We maybe tend to sometimes sort of put players to the side if they get to this stage of being awkward, or they go off the boil in their early teens. And really, we need to take care of them more than just go for results. So we need to make them feel as if they belong rather than sacrificing them. And that tends to happen sometimes, maybe in development squads more than clubs. But it's that idea of just wait, keep them longer. Results are really how will these players turn out rather than how will we win the under-12 league. That would be my opinion on it.
And I suppose your message then is almost as many as possible for as long as possible.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the number of players that are thrown to the wayside, or they just disappear off the out of the GAA where we are, is huge, coming up through, as you know, right up through 17, 18, 19. Now, some of those will go naturally, but quite a few of them we might be doing not the right thing by them, put it like that. We might be looking for a nice, neat squad rather than as many people for as long as possible, as you say.
And it can be difficult because, like, I think one of the great things about the organization is our structures have served us quite well, but sometimes our own structures cause us difficulties like that, you know, the player who's like that, maybe a little bit small at 14 or 15, you know, who might just grow that little bit later. It's not, you know, our structures, we play under 12, under 13, under 14, under 15, for example, and, you know, our rules don't allow a 14-year-old, even if it's a small 14-year-old, to play under 13, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes that gets in the way, but I mean, when you look at the whole idea of everything being player-centered now, right? If we're going to go along the lines of player-centered, then you have to act that out. And player-centered means looking at that fella who's in a club. Let's take my own club, and they're pretty good at it. That wee lad's in the club, and giving him the same worth as somebody else. If that means taking a situation where you're running games half-time, you switch over, there's a number of counties doing that. If it means putting two teams together, if it means extra transport money, you really have to do it. And I know it's tough to do, but you really, really have to do it. If we get this up and running again, it's really all about bringing as many people as possible along. You just don't know where your next big player is going to come from. And apart from that, I mean, if we take, for example, the idea of relatedness, everybody wants to push this idea of player-centered and relatedness. In other words, making people feel they belong. So what better way of making them feel they belong than taking an interest in them for a lot longer than we have in the past?
And is that something that would have come to you from your teaching career as well?
Well, bit by bit, it would have come through teaching, yeah. I know exams tend to sort of categorize them fairly quickly. The school I was in, we would have not streamed, but banded kids quite often. But then all of a sudden they come through into third and fourth year, and they're working together for GCSEs. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages, but we obviously were in the north. We had the situation where we're separated at 11 to grammar schools and secondary schools. I was in the secondary school. Really, in those situations, we're trying as much as possible to bring as many of them on. It's amazing the number of students who take nearly like a brain growth spurt come 13 or 14 that you never thought of in the first place, and you've separated them into different classes. Same for footballers, same for hurlers, same thing.
And for those people then not coming from a teaching background, do you think it's different for them?
Well, it's different for them in terms of familiarity and maybe in terms of language of instruction, because we're used with language of instruction. And that'll be a distinct disadvantage for some of them that are not coming from teaching. But no matter what walk of life you come from, you're going to have either taken instruction or given instruction. You've been given instruction, you've listened to it, and you understand what type of instruction was best for you. You can call on those experiences to actually, let's say, give you the idea of who made an impression on you, who didn't make an impression on you, what way did you like to be taught, what way did you like to be instructed, what motivated you. So you can carry those through the same way. And a lot of this is trial and error. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I would have learned, as I pointed out in the webinar, was the likes of Brian McIver and his empathy for players. He had the same empathy when he was a teacher. Lots of different people who had humor, but you can pick up on these. And one of the guys that was on that list that I made there, a fellow Martin Duffin, not a teacher, but he was just a very straight talker, and some of the players really liked that. So his instruction was really good with that.
And for yourself then as a coach, do you see that you have evolved in your understanding and application of those instructions?
Oh, very much so. I mean, put it like this, I took a long time to move down that line of, let's say, from being the coach that controlled everything, and every instruction was sort of, this is an edict, ways that I wanted things done. And in the last number of years, I moved away from that to delegating instruction, first of all to other coaches, now delegating instruction, delegating responsibility to players. And then the in-between bit for me would be this sort of, not quite delegation and definitely not control, but assisted. So in the middle of it, you're sort of taking a squad and you're taking one or two players in a game and you're assisting them with what you want them to do, but they have flexibility in when they do it. So you want somebody to do a particular thing. For example, let's say you've a player who tends to sort of run the ball all over the place and you want them to change. My old way would have been putting a condition on the whole team, 2-touch football, pointless. Then I would have moved to a condition on him, 2-touch football. Again, you think it's great and then you go pointless. So the condition now is, okay, you're allowed 2 solo runs in this match, in this 10-minute game, you choose. And the difference is huge because that player then has got a bit of autonomy. They've got that feeling of, I get the chance to choose here. I can pick my time. And believe it or not, you end up getting somebody who maybe becomes very discerning in when they use the solo runs. In fact, they may not use them at all. So that's my move from being very controlling to more delegating and assisting.
What caused that move, do you think?
Well, a number of different things would have caused that move. Me being intransigent and players being intransigent might have been one of them, as in we just locked horns. And at that time, I suppose I would have been, I'm the coach, or I'm the teacher, whatever, I'm the boss. Other bits and pieces like reading from other sports, reading stuff that people would have come up with in basketball, in rugby, just generally following it over the last number of years, where people put different approaches on things. You're maybe a wee bit hesitant about trying them, but the great thing was, particularly in the school I worked in, I had lots of people who were like-minded, and they would have said, we'll try it, let's have a go at it. And it's the old story. I mean, literally, when I was in school and I picked up on this idea of peer teaching or peer instruction, the natural follow-on is to go and try it out on a pitch. Now, if I'm in a school environment, I'll get plenty of support in that because it is a teaching environment and it's a instructing environment. If I go to my local club, I'm wondering, right, will I get any leeway here to start this idea of peer coaching? And then you realize, well, you don't really need anybody to support you, you just go and do it yourself. So we introduced a bit of peer coaching down at Magherafelt, and it seemed to work well. And I'd still then, as a result, that would advocate it in different places.
Yeah, I was just getting to
that all came from peer instruction from somebody who will never know, as I said in the webinar, who will never know that he had an influence on peer coaching, and that was Eric Mazur, the Harvard professor. So you pick it up from everywhere.
And is peer something that you believe coaches should be devoting a lot of time and sessions to?
Yes, is the short answer, because at the minute, often it's zero time that they're given to it, right? But it shouldn't dominate your sessions. It's not one of those situations where you just go, okay, peer coaching, it's the next big thing, let's go for it, because it'll fall apart around you. Different situations call for different degrees of attention to it. But let's say, if I was thinking of peer coaching, I would approach it from nearly like a buffet menu. In other words, you have a number of different things that you're going to fit into a session or sessions over a period of time. Peer coaching might be an option that you have there all the time, but you might only take it in once every other session or 1 in 3 sessions. The other thing about it is you've got to work out, are you going to give it a separate slot? So are you going to decide that this is going to be something you have in your warm-up? So let's say one of the teams that I was with a few years ago, we did it on the warm-up. So we would do evasion and acceleration as part of the warm-up. So it would be players working in twos. One is the coach, one is the person who was trying it out, and they would help each other. Or do you want to simply subsume it into game situations? So you just want to be more of let's do it this way. Let's have an observer with 3 teams, with 2 teams playing at a time, with a third team resting. Let's identify some observers who are looking to see, they've got specific people on any one of those teams that they're responsible for, and watching out what they do and giving them advice. That's peer coaching the same way.
And it's an intriguing concept, really. And to what extent do you have to help the players to become a peer coach?
Well, first and foremost, I just give them a bit of license. I mean, the main thing is you give them a bit of instruction to start them off. I mean, put it like this, if I'm going to have, let's say I'm going to do peer coaching with a couple of lads to do with blocking, you have the idea of throwing them in there, let them work away, and then take them out and talk to them about a couple of things that you want them to look for. But the main way I would approach it would be, before they start, just have them together and say, look, we're looking to encourage this and this. These are 2 things. Go away, work with each other. And when you're the coach, you're looking for those things. When you're the player, you're trying to act those things out. There's the 2 main things we're looking for. So you're arming them with a wee bit of information, not giving them a list of 10 things to look for, just arming them with a wee bit of information so that they can go away and become this coach for 5 minutes with their mate. And it works. It works. They love it. They love the responsibility of it. Now you're taking a risk. You are taking a risk because you're never quite sure with this dotted around the field with maybe 14, 15 pairs. what exactly is being said. You're taking that risk, but that's not a reason to not do it.
No, not at all. And that's actually something I was thinking of there, that, you know, like you said, there might be 10, 12, 4, depending on numbers, 14 pairs around the pitch, and players trying to support each other. So it's really a case of you and your other coaches going around and observing and trying to give a little bit of support there as well.
Yeah, just get in among them. Just get in among them. And it's the old story. If you actually have to teach something and keep an eye on somebody and you're another player, you're learning it at the same time. And the great thing about it is you're probably using, this is the big thing that Eric Mazur talked about when he introduced peer instruction in Harvard. It was the idea that when they were coaching or teaching each other at that stage, when they were teaching or instructing each other, they were using student language. So they were using beginner language rather than expert language, if you want to call it that. So what's wrong with an under 14 coaching another under 14 and talking the same language to them about it? But they know they've got a couple of indicators to say, try this, try this. No, you're not doing that. You would never get by me in that. Yeah, that's better. I mean, we've seen it at Magherafelt. It works.
It strikes me as something that would be not maybe natural is maybe the wrong word, but you can imagine a couple of players going down to the pitch and with trying, you know, trick shots and various different things and trying to advise each other as to how to do that best. So yeah, like it seems more of an extension and bringing that into an actual coaching scenario then.
Well, the real rubber stamp I got on this, so that it was we had one of these situations where we were doing an award ceremony, and it was in a local hotel, and we had invited Brian Fenton up to it. So Brian was there, and Brian goes back with our club to the time Fela was on in 2007. We played Raheny in the final. Brian was midfield. Another guy with us, Fergal Duffin, was midfield. They kept in touch ever since, and Brian was up and wanted to have a bit of crack with Duffin. And I had known Brian for a couple of times. I've been down with Raheny. And just in the middle of the conversation, he happened to say, one of the things we do now is peer coaching. So we were at that on a club level, and then I want to know what we're doubling at. And they were just pointing out, he just pointed out a couple of things they did, peer coaching, instructing each other, and Jim had given them license to do this. So if they can do it, we can do it.
Yeah, I don't see why not at all, and it strikes me as a really, really interesting approach, and something that I think a lot of coaches should give a lot of thought to. You were always known as an innovative coach in yourself, Philip. Talk about maybe your use of technology and how you might support players and other coaches in using technology.
Well, technology sort of hit me like a bolt from the blue. Again, as I said in the webinar, the problem a lot of us have would be we just devolve this whole idea of technology to the sports analysts and to the sports scientists, but they work on a different level. They're totally on a different level. I said they're in the penthouse suite, I'm on the first floor, but there's a gap on the first floor. So when you're looking at players, and when I was looking at players, I was in a situation where, okay, first and foremost, it was technique. You wanted to change their technique. I was always fascinated by the work done by Dave Ulrich as far back as 1995. We had him over in 1997 in Armagh. But when you looked at technique, the problem I had with technique was, for me, everything happened so fast that you were guessing your way through what might that be. Now, you're still guessing your way through. But whenever I was fit to take a clip using Huddle of a player and slow it down and have a look at it at different times, bit by bit, you got an indicator of it might be this, it might be that, something that you would never have seen in the first place. So we tried them. We just tried out various things, and they happened to work, and then sometimes they wouldn't. But you take a fella who, for example, is taking a shot, as I pointed out, Podrick was taking a shot. We would never, ever have worked out that what he was actually doing in full speed was the bottom half of his body was turning towards the goals and he was twisting the top half away until we got him on slow motion camera. And people might say, oh, for heaven's sake, Philip, catch yourself on. Slow motion camera and you're working with under 14s, under 15s, 16s. It's not a thing that dominates. You're not wheeling in a cameraman to do this, that, and the other. You're getting parental permission, you're working on it, you're sending it to the parents, and you're having a look at better technique. The wee lad Kerr, again, if we hadn't slowed his down, we'd have never found out that he actually sits into a shot and it was never going to go anywhere. So we got him to stand tall. And these things happen all over the place. Now, the extension to that was moving it into the pitch. And I loved the whole idea of getting videos of games, moving it into the pitch, not looking so much technique anymore, but looking at game habits. And that's where there was a real gap. People were looking at game analysis in terms of stats, et cetera, and data, and lots of different bits and pieces, but there were habits that were happening over 2 or 3 games. I mean, an example, a couple of years ago, county player, probably seen as a really good deliverer of the ball, nearly quarterback style, good kick passer, and he was and still is. But for some reason, over a period of 2 or 3 games, his passes were being intercepted more often than they were getting through. And I took clips and found out really what he seemed to be doing was he was just taking a snap really quick, releasing the ball far too early. All we did was get him to trial a wee bit, showed him this and said, take an extra second to have a look. And then he did, and his completion rates went through the roof just by taking an extra second. He hadn't realized that he'd begun to get far too quick and just play this ball really quickly. My point was, if I'm looking at that and I have time to look at that, those are wee idiosyncrasies that people have that you want to just iron out. Just iron them out. It's also things like players bunching. The good teams, the forwards don't bunch. The average teams, the poorer teams, the forwards bunch. You have to show them it on video and use technology to actually get them to identify this and move away from it. So it has a great, I would urge people to get, start looking at simple technology. I'm not putting forward this idea of huddle, but it's the one I use. There's lots and lots of different ones out there. But it's excellent.
And I was struck by something you just said there about the coach. And I often think that for lots of coaches, inexperienced and not so inexperienced, the only way we know something has gone wrong is because the outcome was wrong, or the outcome was not what we expected. So, players, instead of kicking the ball in one direction, the ball ended up going some other direction. Now, you're not really sure what happened because the movement can be really quick, and especially, for example, in hurling, there's so many moving parts that the whole thing might just go by in a flash before you even realize what happened. And that's why I always thought that the head hands feet work that you and John Morrison and Terence McWilliams did was really revolutionary for that time as well.
Yeah, well, that was it was one of those situations where it was driven by the 3 of us in different ways. John was very innovative in what he did. Terence had fantastic knowledge, great knowledge. I suppose I brought that bit of, a measured approach to it. How would we use this? And we met several times to work on that. And we got it wrong and we got it right. And that forms the basis of quite a few things that I would have done over the years. Going along to coaches and saying to them, all right, we're going to act things out here with not a child in sight. No players here at all. We'll act these out. We'll act head, hands, feet. And once they get the hang of it, then we brought in the children. Let them use or act out the things as well. And at that point, coaches got the notion that, oh, this actually works as a template. This is a template that we work with. Now, you apply head, hands, feet to technology, put it in line with technology. And slow motion camera, it is an absolute treat. A treat. I mean, if you're looking at, we had a big strong fella who was faint in the sidestep, doing evasion skills, couldn't work out what was wrong because he was never getting away from anybody, and yet he had pace. And when we looked at him, we found out that every step he was taking in that was like 2 feet long. There was no big stride. There was nothing. We just got him to change his stride length. It became a different skill altogether. We would never have picked it out unless we'd slowed it down. But it's a real challenge, and it's really exciting. And you don't have to be a sports analyst to be trying it out.
No, not at all. And look, it's a foundation for lots and lots of coaches around the place. Like I said, that maybe they're not really sure. They might be inexperienced in our games or whatever. But can you focus on the head, hands, feet, and bring in the hurling? It's a really, really strong little tool for coaches to utilize. I'm really interested in the game habits that you mentioned as well. Paddy Butler, you know well, always spoke about how in the storm players revert to type, and it sort of strikes me that lots of times we can have players who, when the pressure is not great, can be really, really good, but sometimes when the pressure comes on, they revert to that, and they revert to type, or the challenge becomes too much for them.
Yeah. All the more reason to have game-based training and game-based coaching from an early age, and give them time to actually develop those good habits bit by bit. I mean, I'm not saying who or what teams or this, that, and the other, but I have seen teams in the past where no matter what a coach said to them about this is what's happening out on the pitch, there's a bit of disbelief over that. Was it really happening? And again, we're back to technology. Once you get your hands on game footage and you can show a variety of different situations where players literally are doing what you said they were doing, but it's there for them to see as well, then the next move is, will they buy into the change? Will they buy into the change? The difficulty is, as Paddy says, and if you just said, you maybe want to buy into the change, but the other stuff is so ingrained that you go back to it. Really, and then it's frustrating. So that's why I love the idea even more of game-based approaches from an early age. And we're back to the same thing. A game doesn't have to be 3-a-side, 5-a-side, 10-a-side, whatever it is. It can be 1v1 stuff, and give them time to work out how they're going to do things to get out of those situations. That would be the biggest learner for me, taking that physical and mental step back from players and not giving them the information straight away. Just stepping off and allowing them to develop a habit or try something out and try it again and try it again. And if I was doing something next year and trying to get things going even more at the club, it would be to try and get coaches to take those steps backwards to allow people, even as young as 7 and 8 and 9, to try things. Just try things. Don't worry about correction.
And for coaches then, it strikes me that peer coaching for coaches would be really, really effective also.
Oh, a treat. I mean, let's put it like this. You take this new idea that's running around, and maybe it's not that new, but I know here in Australia it's fairly new and they're going at it, and that's coach developing. The idea of coach developer. And I know the GAA are involved in it. I don't know the detail of it, Peter, but I know the GAA and maybe Sport Ireland, is that right? They're working together on this?
Yep.
But the idea for me now, it may not run exactly as they're thinking at headquarters, but the idea for me of coach developer is, I have seen too many times where coaches don't really want to go to external courses. So they're working away at your club, and they're not happy to go to external courses. There's something being run at Owen Beg for Derry. They don't go. It does happen quite often. Even if you come in as an outsider into the club and you're running something there, they're reluctant to participate. So you always get the excuses they're not available. But you imagine the situation where you have a coach developer in your club and they're there to be a support, somebody to lean on. They're the ones that are helping out the next bit of your coach development, but you're comfortable, you're in your club and it's one of your own. Now that person's maybe so steeped in coaching, that coach developer, that they're the ones that are going outside the club to get the extra bit of education. Then they're coming back and bringing it in, but they're trusted and accepted when they come back in. For me, that's peer coaching of coaches, and I think that's a really, really exciting path to go down.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's going to be the next sort of major leap forward in coach development, from what I can see anyway. That and it's something that strikes me in Gaelic games, that all of our clubs would view themselves as places where players become better. But I think we need to get to the mindset where clubs view themselves as places where coaches also get better. And that as a coach, I can share things with my fellow coach of a different age group, but we're all from the same club, and having someone to facilitate that will be really strong.
Oh, mighty. I mean, look, there's the role, as you know, of coaching officer, but a lot of the coaching officer role is an administrative one. And it can be done by somebody who's really good at administration and perfect. So you need to add this role of coach developer, which means their only focus is developing fellow coaches in that club. And by developing fellow coaches in that club, the other big thing that they'll do surely is sustain the numbers of coaches, or even increase the numbers of coaches. I mean, recruitment could be part of their portfolio. And if you're in a situation like that, imagine if you're going into a club and the culture is 5 years from now that you're not going in with your two arms at one length. You're going into the club and you know there's a man or woman there who's the coach developer, and that's your go-to person. If you need them, they're going to place you wherever it is. You've got other people around you. But if you're ever stuck, or if there's a team that's ever stuck, there's the coach developer. You don't have to worry from someone about, oh, we'll get somebody in from the county board, we'll get somebody in elsewhere. You have one of your own there whose job in that club is simply to develop coaches and improve them. And in turn, they'll develop the players.
Yeah, it's a really nice, simple model. It gets rid of all the complexities that are there. And I think one of the other things that strikes me about coach development in the future is that the concept of learning being something that you do out of season is going to become alien to everybody. And the concept of removing learning and practice, I think, is again going to be seen in time as being for the birds. But I can see how this coach developer could really try and embed learning during the playing season. Like, it doesn't have to be huge time commitment, or it doesn't have to be you know big long sessions in a clubhouse, but just putting the focus that coaches can learn and develop it as the season is progressing.
Yeah, I mean, we've attempted this at O'Donovan Rossa and Magherafelt in the middle of last year. So we attempted, not under the title of coach developer, but I ran a number of sessions open to coaches from football, ladies football, camogie. We don't have hurling at the club. And they were invited to come on a Friday evening for half an hour. It was half hour, 40 minutes at most, and it was deliberately set at that, 40 minutes. And they got a program for 4 different weeks. And each week it just gave a title that said, translating from paper to pitch. So come along, and in 40 minutes, we'll toss around the idea of turning games that are on paper into real life. And up in the upstairs area of our club rooms, we did that. So it usually ran with a brief introduction of 2 or 3 minutes, then activities for coaches in their own groups to actually try and make this game come real. They would chat about other groups. Then we would finish, and there was always a facility to say, look, if you need any more, come back to me, or if you want to share with other people in different teams, come back to them. And then it was over. So we had a number of titles that were done on this, but as far as I was concerned, it was sort of the early stages of coach development. So very informal. In they came, 4 weeks. People went away with ideas that others had given them, and ideas maybe that I gave them, and they also gave their ideas to somebody else. That was a forum that we never really had before. So we trialed it. Seems to work, and if we get up and running again, we'll do more of it.
Yeah, it's a format that seems to be working in lots of places, and anywhere that we've been suggesting that they do it, it seems to work quite well for those people. But again, it's more about treating that coach as a person, and that coach then going on to treat the player as a person as well. And the more that we are finding out about these things, the more we see that's really one of the key elements.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it just struck me a couple of days ago. I was thinking about this. Right, the big move is obviously from the drills to games move. That was a big move we made over a number of years. Right, put them in the game rather than have people doing drills. Everybody in different sports was advocating the whole idea of move to a games-based approach. It doesn't mean you're doing games all the time, but a games-based approach. And that was to put them in the situation, put players in the situation where they would be working all the time. Now, what struck me was you put your coach developer into the scenario with a GAA club. What you're doing for your coaches is you've taken them away from the drills situation of maybe going and attending courses, right? And you've put them into their own environment where they're actually going to be working all the time. So they're getting this continued drip feed of education bit by bit from one of their own, in their own environment, which then they can feed on. And that's educating the whole person, both as a coach and then onto a player.
And we've, like I said, we'll finish up now with this last one. And you've spoken a lot about autonomy and competence and relatedness, and that really speaks to coaching the player, doesn't it? Or coaching the person.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, this is coaching the person. This is one of the things that, well, I'll be honest. There was a guy with Derry who was a sports psychologist, a friend of mine called Noel Brick, Dr. Noel Brick. And I would just ask him questions left, right, and centre about different types of approaches to players, etc., etc. Now, he didn't force this down my throat in any way, but he always kept coming back to things like basing it on the theory, self-determination theory. But at that stage, I really didn't want to know. I was more interested in, I don't want to know the theory, I want to know the practical applications. But in the end, you have to explore the theory to get the right way of things. So now that I've been in Australia for a while, I'm getting a chance to actually look at things like self-determination theory. And it's coming together. And as you say, it's the ideal foundation for coaching the person. Because what you're doing is you're taking a motivating factor, something that people will grow with. And you've got the three strands of it: autonomy and competence and relatedness. And if you apply those in a coaching situation, they're superb. I mean, you're working towards, as a coach, you're working towards making that player more autonomous. You're being autonomy supportive. You're basically saying, look, we're giving you more chance to get involved in the decision making. We're taking more cognizance of what you say. So we're making you more autonomous. His motivation will go up, or her motivation. The competency thing, we've always been trying to do, improve their competence. But the big one for me is the whole idea of relatedness. And that is the sense of belonging. Just that sheer sense of belonging. And I'll take it down to the basic thing. How do you make the player who's number 26 on the squad or 27 on the squad feel as if they belong in that club? They belong in that club. That's the trick. Or they belong in that county or whatever. It's easy to have number 3, number 4 on the list to feel as if they belong. But the one who's really far down the list, if we can work on how to get them to have a feeling of belonging, we take an interest in them, etc. That's all based around self-determination theory. So it's various strands are coming together for me now, but the biggest one for me is that relatedness. Players have to feel as if they belong to that club.
I feel like we might just finish up then with a couple of shorter questions on maybe some advice that you might provide for some of our coaches listening.
That's a big, broad area, isn't it? Yeah. I'll tell you more than anything else, Peter. And they're not specific. It's just they have to be brave. Coaches have to be brave. If you have an idea in your head, don't hide it. Have a go, talk to somebody, try it out. You never know. The next big idea, the next really good idea doesn't have to come from on high. It doesn't have to come from a working party. It doesn't have to come from a committee, a national governing body. You just don't know when you could have the next idea that would unlock something for players on a squad, or players in a county, or players in a team, or even one player. And there are loads of people out there who have ideas and they just haven't pushed them yet. And my advice would be, look, go for it. John Morrison used to say, it was the thing that's bandied about now quite often, but he did say it. And he would have said, look, you're laughing at me because I'm different. I'm laughing at you because you're all the same. And his idea was, he knew he was different. He was going to try things. So that would be more than anything else that I'd say. Be ready to be different. Try things out.
Look, thanks very much for your time tonight, and also for your time over the last number of weeks in putting this together. I appreciate being locked down in Australia is obviously a very difficult place to put things together, but you've really given us an awful lot to think about over the course of the last hour or so. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for everything that you've done.
No bother. Thanks, Peter. See you later. Bye-bye.